A sudden outbreak of a devastating virus hit Seoul, impacting Yeonwoo's school trip. Yeonwoo, hopeful of connecting with his unrequited love, Soyeon, faces a crisis when unidentified cells transform infected individuals into ferocious beings. The classmates' Seoul sightseeing turns into a nightmarish ordeal. I know you love manga retellings, but only 12% subscribed. Hit like for the next episode. The events move to the room where Kang Ji-hoon and the soldier were talking about Hunmi. After the man offered to help the boy find his girlfriend, he said that in return, Kang Ji-hoon had to promise him something. He didn't look at the guy. He looked at what was happening outside. He said that the boy had to promise that from now on he would not lose his temper so easily and would keep himself in check better. He also added that the headman, Kang Ji-hoon, should think about who could be a threat to his friends. The man spoke calmly and confidently. It was like talking to a father who was giving valuable advice. The boy did not answer. His hormones and adolescent maximalism did not allow him to react calmly and simply accept the words of a man who apparently wished him well. So Kang Ji-hoon just left, although he promised himself to think about what the soldier said. He wanted to find his beloved Hunmi. He still had strong feelings for her. The man realized that the boy had left. He felt different emotions now, but sadness prevailed the most. The soldier saw in Kang Ji-hoon himself and his beloved, whom he had unfortunately lost. The man looked at his ring. His heart was squeezing inside. He was in so much pain. Suddenly, he heard the voice of his beloved Ji-sun. She said that this behavior was unusual for her, because he had never worried about anyone before. The man said out loud that if his beloved Ji-sun was here now, she was probably laughing at him for being a soldier in such a situation with teenagers. Suddenly, the man regained consciousness and heard someone yelling from the street to open the door. The voice was threatening and very angry. The soldier turned toward the sound and realized he had to run to help. The events again shifted to the moment when the robbers were attacked by a zombie cat and the teenagers began to run away from the door. The soldier shouted that his classmates were running to him. He quickly realized what was happening. The teenagers ran after him. The man seemed to know where the other exit was. They had to leave the room, because now there were at least 5 monsters around them who knew they existed. When the children ran into the room where the man was, the soldier was carefully examining what had happened outside and assessing the criticality of the situation. The girl hid behind a man in a striped sweatshirt. They watched their friend being eaten by a zombie cat. The woman asked what they should have done. Suddenly they heard a soldier speaking to them. He was shouting for the 2 of them to run to him. The man could not leave them to die and shouted for them to run to him as quickly as possible, as it was very dangerous outside. But the couple stood in a stupor and did not move. The soldier was waiting for them and kept calling them over. Suddenly Kang Ji-hoon stopped the man and said that if he let the 2 in, they would all be in danger. But the soldier told him that they would have been dead too, if not for that old lady from the restaurant. He shouted at the guy that they shouldn't have helped these people then. Goodness must be repaid. Kang Ji-hoon looked at him with a serious look. His face showed an understanding of how selfish he had been, but the couple continued to stand there. The woman put her hand over her mouth in amazement. She could not believe what was happening, but the man seemed to be slowly moving toward the entrance. He had to save himself. Finally, he yelled to his friend Miju to run after him. Then the pair began to run, but a zombie cat noticed this. He didn't want to kill his victims. Suddenly, the monster opened its mouth again and screamed at the steam. It released its tentacles on the fugitives. The woman covered her face with her hands to avoid seeing what was happening. They were not as fast as teenagers. Kang Ji-hoon noticed a fan on his wall. Without hesitation, the guy grabbed it and threw it at the zombie monster. Thus, he saved the couple from certain death. The soldier was shocked by this act of his new friend. Kang Ji-hoon was silently shaking his head. The guy was really a good shot, because he hit the target and saved the couple. He noticed that the man was staring at him, so he asked what the problem was. And then he said that the soldier himself said that they were supposed to help these people, but they didn't have time to finish the conversation because the couple had already run into the room, lying on the floor. The soldier peered through the crack in the door to see what had happened to the zombie monster. Perhaps it had died, and then they could all stay in the room. The man saw that the fan was stuck in the cat. It was not spinning because its paws were stuck in the frog egg virus and mucous membranes. The cat showed no signs of life, Suddenly, the zombie monster raised its head and perked its ears. The cat growled as if to let them know that they would not get rid of him so easily. Then, the soldier slammed the door shut and held it tight. He realized that the zombie monster knew about them and would soon get there. They had to quickly come up with an escape plan. For now, the soldier simply locked the door. The whole company looked at the newcomers in shock. The man, meanwhile, was laughing loudly and collecting his thoughts, replaying what had just happened. Suddenly, he started crying and thanked his rescuers a lot. He was ashamed of them for not helping them when the company wanted to get into the mini-market. But suddenly, the man's tearful speech was interrupted. Everyone turned to the door because they heard some sounds from the other side. Someone tried to open the handle. It seems that the zombie monster got to them faster than they could have imagined. The soldier reacted quickly, so he propped the door up with himself, holding it securely. The man loudly commanded them all to bring something heavy to him quickly. Then the soldier would be able to block the door. After all, if he let them go, the zombie monster would most likely get inside. But the teenagers were a little stuck, because they could not get over the previous incident. Then the soldier once again told them to think faster. Still, the man was very professional, and this helped him to react quickly in such extreme situations. Thanks to him, the company was still alive. The teenagers quickly came to their senses and ran to find something heavy to prop up the door with. Kang Ji-hoon immediately grabbed the refrigerator and shouted to Kang Min to help him. But he said that he had his hands full because he had grabbed the water boiler. These were probably the heaviest objects in the room. Everyone wanted to escape so badly and not let the soldier down. A few minutes later, there was already a pile of heavy objects under the door, and loud gasps were heard. Everyone present did a good job. They propped up the door with a refrigerator, a heater, a water boiler, a freezer, and many other items. The monster could definitely not come in now. For a few seconds, everyone stood silently and looked at the door to see and hear if the monster could enter. Suddenly, instead of a zombie monster, they heard a woman crying. She covered her face with her hands. A man named Seongchul Oppa immediately approached her. He tried to calm his friend Misha down. He hugged her and said that he would protect her no matter what. But the girl still cried a lot. She could not bear the loss of her friend. It seems they were quite close. Like here, the soldier asked if they were okay. It was impossible not to notice the girl's despair. The man expressed his condolences and said he was very sorry for what had happened to their friend. Seongchul just nodded. He was also grieving, but he kept all his emotions inside. Here, the soldier asked whether the couple was also going to the shelter and with this phrase seemed to invite them with him. But, surprisingly, the couple knew about the shelter, and the man said that they were also going there, but wanted to rest a bit before reaching the shelter. He also added that all the local people were in that shelter. Suddenly, Kang Min spoke up. He said that the distance from the gas station to Seoul Station was less than 1 kilometer. It was close enough, so most likely everyone had evacuated long ago. At the same time, the guy was looking for something on the table. Kang Ji-hoon noticed this and asked what his friend was doing. Kang Min replied that he was looking for something useful and continued to look for something. The headman asked another question, whether it was really that important in this situation. Kang Min didn't even turn to his friend and just did his own thing. He thought that Kang Ji-hoon just wanted to hit on someone. Suddenly, Kang Min made a triumphant sound. It seems that the guy had found something after all. He opened a drawer in his desk, which contained various office supplies, scissors, glue, a stapler, tape, and a book. Kang Min shouted happily that he had found something. His voice sounded triumphant, as if he had won the lottery. This time it had to be something better than a small hammer. Suddenly the guy picked up the key and jingled it merrily. Kang Min shouted for everyone to look at him and showed him what he had found. The boy seemed to think it was a car key. Kang Ji-hoon picked up on his friend's joy and gave him a thumbs up and told him he was doing well. Kang Min said they were now able to get to the shelter more or less safely. He asked if it wasn't wonderful. After all, no one was as happy as he was. Suddenly, he heard something strange, a sound, so he looked down to see what it was. Suddenly, all his joy disappeared as frog eggs began to crawl out from below, spreading the virus. They were right next to Kang Min's leg. Suddenly, everyone jumped up quickly and screamed. Kang Min jumped away from them because it seemed that the eggs could sense the boy's presence, so the virus released its white tentacles at Kang Min. A zombie monster began to crawl out from under the rubble. It simply turned into a liquid and somehow got through all the objects and into the room. The first to react, as always, was a military man. The man shouted for everyone to disperse, took a chair and swung it to break the window and escape from the room and the monster. Everyone started to climb out through the hole one by one. Kang Min and So Young went first, followed by the soldier, and the last were a couple of newcomers. Meanwhile, the monster was getting deeper and deeper, leaving its slime all over everything. Kang Ji-hoon was the first to get down to the ground. The height was not high, but it could have been an obstacle for Seo Young because of her leg. But everyone managed to jump out of the window. The first guys ran the fastest to find the car and open it. Kang Min reacted quickly and looked at the keys he was carrying. He looked closely and shouted happily that it was a Honda, because this sign was painted on the keys. This would have helped them greatly in their search and narrowed down the range of options. But unfortunately, all the cars in the parking lot were Honda. The soldier said so and added that they should keep running, because at this rate, they would not find the car they needed. Suddenly, as the soldier was running, he noticed something that made him stop for a second. He turned his attention to a large Honda car. The man thought it was this car, so he ran to it and asked Kang Min for the keys. It turned out that the keys did fit the car. The man got behind the wheel, although he did not say he knew how to drive, and started the car. The soldier shouted to the others to run to the car and get in. With it, they could get to the shelter quickly and relatively safely. 3 people were left, So Yeon and the newcomers Miju and Seongchul Oppa. Suddenly he noticed something. What he saw was not good. A zombie monster was flying behind the runners. Miju's wife was the last to run and complained that it was too far and she couldn't keep up. The military man immediately shouted to warn them that a zombie monster was running behind them. He shouted as loudly as he could because he was sincerely worried about his friends. Everyone turned around to see what the danger was. Kang Ming had almost climbed into the car in the meantime. Suddenly, a zombie monster attacked someone. Unfortunately, Miju didn't have time to escape and was captured by the ugly giant's tentacles. Seo Young and Seongchul Oppa put their hands over their ears in fear. The woman screamed and begged for help. Oppa turned to the girl's scream. She was calling his name. Miju was screaming for him to help her. She didn't realize that she was actually dead and had to give her friend a chance to escape. For a second, Seongchul Oppa stopped and looked at his friend and what the zombie monster was doing to her. But the man ran on. He was crying because he had just lost his second loved one in an hour, but he realized that he had to save himself. His heart was clenching from helplessness. Meanwhile, the teenagers all managed to get into the car. Suddenly, they were startled by the man's scream. They all turned to him. Seongchul Oppa shouted out the window and told the soldier to start the car quickly. There was little time, because if the zombie monster had time to pounce on the car, they would not have survived and would have been trapped. Appa got into the car, pushing the teenagers into the car, because there was not enough space for so many people. Everyone did not understand the man's emotions and just stared at him in a stupor. Suddenly, Seongchul Oppa shouted loudly again for the soldier to start the car faster. His eyes looked so frightened that they seemed crazy. It was very frightening. The soldier immediately stepped on the gas and drove off. Suddenly they saw a sign that said, Seoul Station. The people in the car shouted with joy. It was such a great victory for all of them, because it seemed like they were about to be safe. Seongchul Oppa shouted joyfully that they had been rescued. Everyone was looking at the road with wide eyes, expecting something extraordinary to happen. Suddenly their happiness did not last long. After all, Kang Min's phone received a notification that clearly did not announce good news. It was a notification that this Seoul station was now a level 3 danger zone. The teenagers immediately raised their heads to see what was so dangerous in the area. They could not believe their eyes. The whole city was like a spider's web covered with this frog egg virus. It was simply unrealistic to survive here. The teenagers could not believe their eyes. They all had their mouths open and sweat was streaming down their faces from fear. Meanwhile, the events moved back to the shelter. A bunch of people were standing in line outside the blue tent. John Woo stood at the very end of the line and looked at someone. It looked like he had found the guy who had survived the zombie monster. He was a young man with bright red hair who was immune to the virus. John Woo had to go up to him and ask him everything. The guy was staring at his hero too much. This aroused suspicion. Because of this, the mysterious immune guy noticed John Woo's stare and looked back at him. Suddenly, the guy's arm started to hurt badly and sharply. Then he looked at the guy and seemed to feel that this pain was because of him. The red-haired guy's face looked rather strange, as if he realized that he was provoking John Woo's pain. Meanwhile, Seoul Station was completely covered in slime and white frog egg virus. Suddenly, one of the monsters stood up and growled loudly. Suddenly, I heard a loud sound of the wheels breaking on the asphalt, followed by a loud and dull thud. The car in which the company was traveling began to lurch from side to side. It was skidding because it had hit a zombie monster. The people inside were not wearing seatbelts and were thrown around the cabin with the car. The soldier shouted at them to hold on better. But fortunately, the man was able to steer the car and simply hit a zombie monster that wanted to attack the company. The soldier looked in the rear view and saw the zombie monster lying unconscious. Perhaps he had knocked it to death, which meant that they could be defeated by force after all. But the adventures did not end there, and Sonchul Oppa shouted to Mister that there was another obstacle in front of them. The driver braked hard, so all the passengers leaned forward. In front of them was a pile of cars covered with white slime and the frog egg virus. Suddenly, another monster stood in front of them. It was bigger than the one the soldier had just shot down. The man realized that they were trapped and did not know how to get out of it. He had to act quickly and most likely turn around or get out of the car. But the soldier decided to act differently. He stepped on the gas and turned the car around. All the passengers in the car were hit in the side. The man continued to turn. His plan worked, and he simply shot down a zombie monster that most likely intended to attack them. The monster rode on the ground and ended up in the back of the car. It got hit a lot, but the car survived and didn't get any viruses. They didn't have time to stick to it. The soldier turned the car around again, but in the other direction. The passengers inside were already thrown to the other side. Kang Ji-hoon lost his footing and hit his head on the front of the car. He may have been injured or wounded. The soldier turned the car around and drove onto the oncoming lane. He was about to crash into the yellow car, but managed to dodge it. It seems that the man still had a license and knew how to drive a car, and very well. But still, the rear-view mirror is a military one. But the owner will not be angry, because most likely he was not alive anymore. Sonchul Oppa told the man that he was going the wrong way. He replied that there was no other way. He had to do what he did. The soldier asked Kang Min, who was in charge of the map, how far they were from the shelter. The guy replied that they were almost there. They had to keep going straight, and then they would reach the shelter. Suddenly, Kang Ming saw something in the window that made him ask to slow down. He pointed somewhere through the window, and all the passengers looked at what Kang Min was pointing at. He pointed to a blue bus with people on it. The soldier stopped abruptly, and everyone was thrown forward. They all looked closely at the bus with people to see if it was also stuck because of the monsters. The company saw that the people on the bus were still alive and showing signs begging for help. Kang Min said that these people were alive and added that he would feel guilty if he pretended not to see them. Kang Ji-hoon told him to shut up. Suddenly, Sonchul Oppa yelled at the soldier. He asked what was happening to him. The man looked at him to see what was wrong. He yelled at the man and asked why he started stopping. The whine was that Sonchul was very much afraid of everything and didn't want to take any risks. The man was shouting at the soldier very loudly. His face looked so crazy. He said that the soldier had gone completely crazy because the shelter was right in front of them. He added that they were just supposed to get to a safe place. The soldier looked at Sonchul Oppa with a strong lack of understanding. It seemed that their values did not match. But according to this logic, the company should not have rescued this man and his friends. Suddenly, the voice of his fiancée sounded in the soldier's head. In her memory, she begged him to go to a safe place. He recalled how his beautiful bride screamed at him on the cable car to go without her because she was being consumed by a monster. These memories were very painful for the man. The last thing he remembered about her was her look. Eyes that were about to fill with tears, because the bride realized that this was their farewell, and she was leaving her beloved alone to grieve. This was not how they had imagined their married life. Suddenly, the soldier opened the door and just ran away. Kang Ji-hoon shouted after him and asked where he ran to. The man did not even close the door behind him and did not say a word. He just realized that he had to save these people. The soldier ran to the back of the car. There was a rope and some devices there. He stood back and looked at the instruments and quickly figured out what to do next. He had to act very quickly, because the people on the bus were probably hiding from the monsters. Kang Ji-hoon shouted at the soldier. He thought that the soldier was acting absolutely stupidly and putting them all in danger. The headman shouted at him, but it was useless. The man was going to finish his job to the end. Kang Min also shouted that he didn't mean they had to rescue those people on the bus when he said he couldn't pretend he didn't see them. As if on cue, Seo-young came up with the idea that maybe the soldier was going to set the fire. Kang Ji-hoon looked at her. His look said that he had just realized everything, as if he had solved some difficult problem. Soyeon realized this and added that there was fuel in the truck the company was traveling in. It all made sense. Meanwhile, the man continued to search for something in the back of the car, not listening to anyone. Kang Ji-hoon couldn't just let it go. He had to come up with something and solve it immediately. He had a plan of action. Suddenly, Sonchul Oppa started shouting at the teenagers and pushing them around. He was pushing them and shouting for them to leave. The man was going to go instead of the soldier. Did he really want to leave him alone like that, even though he had recently saved his life? But Kang Ji-hoon did not pay attention to this, and simply asked in response if Sonchul Oppa had anything that could have started the fire. But the man simply remained silent, stunned by the teenager's question. Then Kang Ji-hoon asked him again, this time louder, about whether he had a lighter. Songchul said that he did, and the boy shouted at him to get it as soon as possible. Before the man could get it, Kang Ji-hoon snatched it out of his hands. The guy was going to get out of the car and go to the military, but at the last moment he turned to the man, gave him a threatening look, and told him not to even think about driving. Then, Kang Ji-hoon got out of the car and shouted to his classmates to keep an eye on the man, because he did not trust him. The soldier did not even look at the boy, but the teenager asked what the soldier was doing and why he was not sitting in the car. He received silence, so he continued to say that the man had promised him to find and save Honmi. The soldier did not expect such an answer and such behavior from a guy who had recently lost control of his emotions. Kang Ji-hoon went on to say how he wanted to find Honmi if he stayed here. The soldier began to think about the teenager's words. The elder continued that the man probably thought they were some kind of heroes, but in reality they were not. First of all, they had to take care of themselves. Unfortunately, they could not save everyone. But the soldier's response surprised him greatly and made him go into a stupor. The man apologized to him. He raised his head, looked Kang Ji-hoon in the eye, and said that he did not expect them to understand him. With his words, he seemed to make it clear that the company could go on without him. The soldier just walked away from the guy. He took the hose and ran to the bus with people. He shouted to them that he would help people get out of the bus and save them all. People looked at him as a savior. He was their last hope. The man shouted that he would pave the way with fire, and people just had to wait a little bit. One of the women on that bus looked at him rather surprised. Suddenly, she screamed loudly, closed her eyes, and put her hands over her ears. Was it the soldier's words that affected her so much? Suddenly, the woman told the soldier to turn around because there was someone behind him. The man was already scared, with drops of sweat running down his face. But he still turned around, and what he saw made his eyes pop out of his head. The soldier expected a lot, but definitely not this. On top of him was a big pile of zombie monsters that had already spotted him. To deal with them, it was necessary to burn the entire bridge, and possibly more. One of the zombie monsters growled, making itself known. One sharp movement and he would be down, and there was nowhere to run. Meanwhile, the teenagers Seo-young and Kang Min, who remained in the car, tried their best to stop Songchul Op from driving. They shouted at him, but the man was not going to stop. He was acting very selfishly. Seo-young decided to see how Kang Ji-hoon and the soldier were doing, but this picture did not make her happy. She loosened her grip a little. The girl shouted to Kang Min to look at the monsters that were already attacking the soldier. He had nothing to defend himself with, because Kang Ji-hoon had the lighter. The teenagers were distracted and didn't hold Sonchul Oppa as tightly. Soyeon said they were supposed to help a soldier. The man saw what was happening and panicked. His heart was racing and he did not want to risk his life for anyone. So he took advantage of the moment when the teenagers let go of him and simply kicked his two friends out. He did it with all his strength, absolutely ruthlessly, and shouted at them to get out. Meanwhile, the zombie monster was about to attack the soldier. The man stared at him in a stupor. Because there was nowhere to run, he could only fight and quickly come up with a plan of escape. Suddenly, some yellow liquid poured onto the zombie monster, preventing it from attacking first. It turned out that the man was pouring gasoline on the nasty giant to save himself. The man acted quickly and decisively, and did not seem to panic at all. It was clear that the soldier felt like a fish in water. He was looking at the monster, which he had poured gasoline all over, and stalled a bit. Suddenly, the man realized something important. The soldier realized that he hadn't brought a lighter, and now the zombie monster would just attack him, and then the man would be finished. He let himself, his company, and the people on the bus who were waiting for him to be rescued. Because of his haste and rash actions, the soldier gave the monster the opportunity to pounce on him. It opened its huge maw and lunged at the man. But the soldier's reaction was excellent. So he quickly jumped away from the zombie monster, and it did not have time to attack or hurt him. The man immediately started running away. Meanwhile, the zombie monster fell to the ground, so the soldier had a little time to quickly find a lighter and finish the job. But unfortunately, the monster recovered quickly enough and was about to strike back. The giant threw its nasty tentacle at the soldier and screamed. Meanwhile, the man was running away, shouting back at him to turn around. The people on the bus were closely watching the fight and trying to help their rescuer in some way. It turned out that Kang Ji-hoon was running to the man. He shouted at him because he wanted to give him the lighter. The boy raised it above his head and shouted for the soldier to run to him, because the teenager could not keep up with him. The man noticed this and was happy. Half the job was done. All that was left was to set the monster on fire and save the people from the bus. Kang Ji-hoon swung to throw the lighter, because time was running out. The guy was sharp, so he didn't worry about her. But the guy changed his mind about quitting. He said loudly that he would finish the military's work. His eyes became stern again and he gained courage. Meanwhile, the man was about to be overtaken by a monster. It was literally a meter away. Time was running out. Kang Ji-hoon decided to run towards the soldier. He was shouting at him that he was coming to him, and it looked like he was going to set fire to a giant zombie monster. The man shouted at the boy to see if he still remembered how to throw a Molotov cocktail. He wanted to remind Kang Ji-hoon that the fire had to break first, but the guy told him to just run away as fast as he could. After all, Kang Ji-hoon had just been the one to take care of them last time. The guy swung hard and threw the lighter on the floor. It immediately broke and started burning. Like here, there was a pretty big explosion. The lighter exploded and created a fire that ignited the zombie monsters. But the guy and the soldier were simply thrown back and fell to the ground, hit by the shockwave. They lay on the floor and watched as everything caught fire. Kang Ji-hoon did it all. He saved the soldier. The friends were lying there, laughing loudly, assessing the consequences of their actions. They started swearing and saying that they were literally one step away from death. The guys miraculously survived. Meanwhile, all the monsters were burning. Suddenly, they heard familiar voices and turned toward the sound. Someone was running toward them and shouting the boys' names. It was Kang Min and So Young. The boy was cursing and coughing heavily. The girl was running after him and was also barely breathing. The company saw their car with gasoline drive away, and Sonchul Oppa was inside. The man looked in the rearview mirror and saw the confused faces of his rescuers. The bastard justified himself out loud and said that he had no other choice. He still felt guilty, but said he didn't want to die. This was the second time the company had saved someone who betrayed them later. If it wasn't for them, Seongchul Oppa would have died at the gas station. Kang Ji-hoon and the soldier just watched their car drive away and did not understand anything. Suddenly, they noticed that the handle from which the soldier was pouring fuel was coming out of the pen. It had caught fire from the fire that Kang Ji-hoon had started. The pen lit up more and more. Suddenly, the man began to realize what was about to happen. The car in which Sonchul Oppa was fleeing was about to catch fire because the cable was burning further. And since there was gasoline inside, the fire spread quickly. Suddenly, there was a very strong explosion. In a matter of seconds, the car caught fire. The shockwave was so strong that everyone was thrown to the ground. Soyeon covered her face with her hands and fell to the ground. No one expected this to happen. The explosion was so strong that it was visible even from the rooftop. The fire was spreading more and more, engulfing the entire space. If there were any people near them, they would have heard the explosion. All the teenagers were lying on the ground. They were thrown to the ground by the shockwave. The soldier was the first to regain consciousness, stood up and asked how the others felt. Suddenly, other people responded to his voice. The man was coughing loudly because there was more and more smoke, and they were right at the epicenter of the explosion. The soldier heard someone running up to him. Two men in yellow uniforms with assault rifles and bulletproof vests were running toward the company. One of them was shouting on the radio to the headquarters that they had found survivors in the area of the operation. The soldier looked up to see these people. Although his mind was still foggy, he clearly realized that they would finally be safe. He had saved these teenagers, and at the same time, the people on the bus. The man could be proud of himself. Finally, the men in uniform found the company and asked if he was okay. They said they would accompany them all to a shelter. Finally, they found him, and he would be safe. Life was starting to get better. The events moved to the shelters. People just sat there and went about their business. A couple was sitting together. The man was sleeping, and the girl was guarding his sleep and was on her phone. People were just living their lives as best they could under the circumstances and the situation in the country. Suddenly, the entire storage facility shook. It went dark and a loud explosion was heard. Everyone started screaming and panicking. People took out their phones and turned on their flashlights. The man who was closer to the window saw a sharp light after the darkness. He cursed loudly. Through the window, the man saw a lot of smoke and fire in the neighboring building. People realized that something terrible had happened. This could not help but panic. Meanwhile, night fell. There was still no power. It seems that a powerful explosion had caused the power grid to break down. People were saving themselves with flashlights from their phones. Suddenly, workers in yellow shirts entered the room. A man with glasses apologized to the people for all the staff for this temporary inconvenience. He also added that the emergency generator was about to be turned on, and then the power would be restored. Meanwhile, Yeonwoo walked around the room with his phone flashlight. He listened to the others in the room complain about the lack of electricity and the unclear timing of when the generator would be turned on. But the guy was calm. He was just walking around the storage room, probably looking for something or someone. Jeonwoo was going up the stairs. Suddenly, the young man entered a corridor that was fenced off with ribbons. There were two workers standing in it. One of them was wearing a white suit, and the other was wearing a yellow suit, probably a military one. A man wearing a white uniform and a mask with gloves reacted sharply to the boy and blocked his passage with his body. The officer stopped Yeonva with his hand and said that he was not allowed to come here. The teenager simply apologized and played dumb. Jeonwoo was in that room for a reason. He was looking for something. When he was refused, he went back down the stairs, looking back at the worker in the white suit. The boy thought about him, about who was hiding behind the mask. Suddenly, Jeonwoo heard a familiar voice. His eyes widened and his pupils constricted, even though it was dark. He turned toward the sound. Then, a sharp pain gripped his hand again where he was holding his phone. A voice asked if he was looking for it. Jeonwoo saw footsteps. It was a man. He was coming down from above and laughing at the boy. The man came down enough to see his face. He said he had figured it out a long time ago. When Yeonwoo recognized the familiar voice, he confirmed his hunch. He was a guy with bright red hair who was immune. The man went on to say that he had realized everything while Jeonwoo was still running around looking for him. He suddenly asked the teenager if he was less susceptible. But Yeonwoo answered him with a question. The boy asked if what was said about him was true, that the man with the bright red hair was immune. The man didn't move an eyebrow when he heard this. His face was stone, but Yeonwoo was more emotional. He shouted that it meant that this man with immunity was infected. But before he could finish speaking, someone behind him scared him, and he turned toward the sound. A man with bright red hair stood steadfastly, showing no emotion. It turned out to be nonsense. So Jeonwoo continued to speak. He looked with his big, frightened eyes at the man. The guy gathered courage and decided to ask him directly about the fact that it turned out that the man with red hair was infected with a virus that had no cells. The man looked at the boy with his stone face. His emotions were not visible or understandable. But Jeonwoo was waiting for an answer. He wanted to get all the explanations and understand what was happening to him. Suddenly, he heard laughter. The man was just laughing in his face. Yeonwoo looked at him and the red-headed boy covered his mouth with his hands and simply choked on his laughter. He finally showed some emotion. The man began to apologize to Jong-woo when he saw that he was not laughing at all because these were important issues for him. The red-haired boy said that Jong-woo was very funny to him, but the teenager did not understand what was happening at all and just looked at the man with an incomprehensible look. Finally, he stopped laughing and said that he didn't think Jong-woo would ask such a thing. He added that it was very funny. It turned out that what made the red-haired guy laugh so much was the phrase that the virus had no cells. He said that everyone has them, but the cells are so small that they could only be seen under a microscope. In other words, it is very stupid to believe that the virus without cells was not dangerous. The virus continued to grow, just very imperceptibly. With these words, the red-haired guy ended his speech. After a silence, the immune guy continued to speak, realizing that Jong-woo had nothing to say. He added that this was why there was an incubation period, although people had not been told about it yet. The guy said that the authorities knew everything. Otherwise, it would not have taken any radical measures to isolate the infected. Suddenly, the man said something that made Jong-woo's blood run cold and his eyes go wide with surprise. The man with the red hair said that he and Jong-woo were already immune. The boy asked if he understood everything correctly, and the man said that the teenager was immune. The red-haired boy said that it was true. He explained that even though the virus was inside them, the boys' bodies would not have changed. Jong-woo listened to this and could not believe his ears. From how the red-haired boy knew that Jong-woo was infected to the fact that he had survived it and was now out of danger. The red-haired boy asked Jong-woo if the infected part of his body hurt after the incubation period. He seemed to notice it when the boy grimaced as he felt a sharp pain. Jong-woo was silent and just listened to the red-haired boy. He was saying that the frog egg virus and the body were supposed to become one, but the cells were already inactive, so they couldn't do it. He added that there had to be some logical explanation for this. Jong-woo looked at the guy with his mouth open and a look as if he was his hero and only savior. But in truth, the red-haired guy was really saving Jong-woo from severe anxiety and panic. After all, knowledgeable equals protected. The guy smiled at his new friend. His smile was a little strange and at times frightening. He looked at Yonva and just considered him. Suddenly, the red-haired guy pointed his second finger, folding his hand into a gun, and then he pretended to shoot it and added a soundtrack in the form of the word bang. Jong-woo was frightened by this development. The guy yelled at his friend and asked him what he was doing. Jong-woo was genuinely scared of what was happening. His life had changed so much in the last few days. He replied that Jong-woo shouldn't be afraid because he was just joking. His manner of speaking and voice sounded a bit arrogant, as if he knew more than he said. Suddenly, a man in a blue uniform and a mask came into the corridor holding a phone. He addressed the red-haired guy and called him Lee Tane. The officer asked if he had finished smoking, and then told him to follow him. The red-haired guy waved at the man in the blue suit and told Jong-woo that he had to go. When Lee Tian walked by Jong-woo, he leaned very close to the boy, at which point it even looked quite intimate, and asked if Jong-woo wanted to know something else. Tane replied that if Jong-woo met the monster again, he should not immediately run away, and then he would learn a lot. After these words, the red-haired boy laughed and walked on, leaving the frightened Yonva alone with his thoughts swirling inside him. The teenager turned back to look at Li Tian. This guy was somehow touching him, even fascinating. Li Tane went downstairs and apologized to the uniformed officer for keeping him waiting for so long. He replied that everything was fine. Then Jong-woo went downstairs to the gym where all the people were. It was dark. The two men were looking out the window and shining flashlights. They were talking about Seoul Station. It turned out to be Park Min and Ham Seong-yu. Jong-woo approached them and asked what they were doing. Ham Seong-yu seemed to be happy even with his classmate, and he immediately showed Jong-woo what he had captured on his phone. The video showed a burning building. The guy commented that at first he just filmed the burning Seoul Station, and then he asked Jong-woo if he could hear him screaming in the video. It turned out that the boys were talking about the monsters screaming in the video because they were burning alive. Park Min commented that he wanted to burn them all, to which Ham Seong-yu said that he could have done it when the monsters all came here. Their classmate Isuri was just passing behind them. She called the boys stupid because there was no one who was not afraid of death. Everyone was afraid of it. But no one heard her. Meanwhile, a crowd of people stood in front of the window with flashlights on, or it was a flash from shooting in the dark, and watched what was happening outside. Then Yeonwoo and Isuri missed each other. The boy saw the girl, but she didn't look at him. But suddenly the girl asked her classmate if he had read the messages in the group chat. Yeonwoo picked up his phone and opened the group, because he hadn't read any messages. It looked like there was something interesting there. The report said that Park Min asked Kang Ji-hoon why he had left Hongmi. The boyfriend added a question about how he must have left the girl when he ran away. Park Min intentionally spread this rumor. Park Min overheard Yeonwoo and Isuri talking, and commented that those who betray their friends are not worth a penny. The guy said this with a smile on his face, as if he was supporting Yeonwoo, even though they both knew and remembered that Park Min had betrayed his classmate with Sojo. He probably hoped that Yeonwoo had forgotten about it, but their conversation was interrupted. Suddenly, two men looking out the window shouted that everyone should immediately look at what was happening outside. Outside the window, the rescuers were taking someone out of the ambulance on a stretcher. Events began to develop quickly. Several workers in white and yellow suits were carrying a man. They shouted for everyone to disperse. An employee who had been in the shelter the whole time asked if he was seriously ill. He seemed surprised that he was brought to the shelter. The man in the white uniform replied that there was no place to put him in the isolation room. Classmates stood behind everyone and watched as new people entered. Ham Sung-yu asked who they were and rejected the hypothesis that they were survivors of the explosion. Someone said they were lucky. Then, in the crowd of people, they began to notice familiar faces. Ham Song-yu was the first to notice and react. He screamed because he could not believe his eyes. Kang Ji-hoon, Kang Min, and Seo-young entered the room. They were all covered with bandages, probably because of burns from the explosion. So-yeon then told Kang Min that even the hammer was useless. They still managed to get to the shelter. The two classmates smiled at each other. Everyone was happy that the nightmare was finally over. Jeonwoo saw his beloved So-yeon. His heart was painfully tight, as if someone was stabbing him with a knife. He was experiencing such a storm of emotions that he thought he was about to burst. Then, Kang Min spotted Yeonwoo and shouted. They all did not expect to see each other. So-young heard her classmate scream and looked up. She saw Jeonhwa. She was afraid of this meeting the most. At the same time, So-yeon was so happy to see that Yeonwoo was alive. It felt like time stood still for a moment, and everyone was walking in slow motion. They looked at each other, and no one knew how to react. After all, the people you seemed to have known for a long time, since elementary school, now seemed like strangers. Yeonwoo, Park Min, and Ham Sung-yu looked at the newcomers without a drop of friendliness. They held a grudge for a long time, even though it seemed that their relationship had long been strained. So-young looked only at Yeonwoo. She was frozen. It felt as if her heart had frozen, and she didn't know how to behave or react. Jeonwoo looked back at her. Suddenly, he realized that this was not the person he had once loved so dearly. He had been wrong. The boy abruptly began to recall how his classmates fled from the Namsan cable car building and abandoned Yeonwoo when he distracted the monster from them. The boy remembered So-yeon's face. She did not stop for a second and clearly noticed her classmate. This escape was intentional. She did nothing then. Suddenly, Yeonwoo's body became aggressive. His eyes were filled with rage, because he remembered his best friend Kim Joo-bin, and the way he was in the last moments of his life. Yeonwoo suddenly realized that it was because of them that his friend died. Meanwhile, the soldier was entering the shelter separately with another crowd. As if on cue, the bus driver noticed the company he had left behind. His eyes narrowed sharply. His heart beat faster, and the coward realized that he should run away as fast as possible. A soldier noticed this out of the corner of his eye. When he turned to look, he saw the unfortunate bus driver already running away. Meanwhile, Kang Ji-hoon was already shouting at Park Min, and the boy was looking at him without order. They just stared at each other for a while, Kang Ji-hoon holding his hand. Then the first one to speak was the headman. He said that Park Min had made a fuss in the chat room, but he hadn't told a word of the truth. Park Min replied by asking what Kang Ji-hoon meant by that. And ironically, Ham Sung-yu asked if he felt deceived and angry about it, hinting that this was how Yeonwoo felt. Kang Ji-hoon replied to him rather rudely, telling him to shut up because he was just Park Min's henchman. These words hurt the boy a bit. Park Min abruptly began to argue that this was not the case, which further proved that Kang Ji-hoon had hit the nail on the head with his words. Ham Seong-yu began to yell at the headman and call him names. But Kang Ji-hoon said that Park Min first had to apologize to his friends for talking about them all in the classroom group chat. But Park Min answered him with a counter-question. He asked why Kang Ji-hoon had such an angry face, and he added ironically that he wondered if the headman was going to hit him. This question was clearly a provocation, so that Kang Ji-hoon would attack first and be the one to blame for the fight. But the guy figured out Park Min and kept his cool, saying that he would have done it before. His classmate just laughed at him. The teenagers got quite close to each other, but Park Min didn't give up. He wanted to get Kang Ji-hoon emotional because he knew that aggression was his weakness. He reminded him that the headman had been summoned to the principal's office for beating up students at school. He asked if he wanted to brag about it here. Then Kang Ji-hoon couldn't take it anymore and became aggressive by grabbing Park Min's shirt. The boy simply told him to let go because he could tear it. Even now, Park Min was thinking about how he looked. But the fight didn't have time to start because the boys were interrupted by Yeonwoo. He approached his classmates and addressed Kang Ji-hoon. Yeonwoo asked him if he was the one who had abandoned him and Kim Jubin on the Namsan cable car. Kang Ji-hoon tried to say something and justify himself, but Yeonwoo didn't want to hear anything. There was no excuse for what he had done. It was just whining. Yeonwoo had changed over the past few days. He no longer wanted to let others wipe their feet on him. The boy interrupted and said that he had heard everything when Kang Ji-hoon and his classmates left him and Jubin. His friend told Yeonwoo everything. He said that Kang Ji-hoon had simply told the truth, without lies or unnecessary excuses. The headman looked at him with a frown. He could feel Yeonwoo's anger and at the same time a little shame for what he had done. Then, the teenager repeated his question because Kang Ji-hoon remained silent. Yeonwoo called him a scumbag and asked him again if he had betrayed them and left them on the cable car. The boy was on the verge of exploding with all the anger and resentment that had been building up inside him all this time. Meanwhile, someone was running very fast up the stairs. I heard loud exhalations. It was a bus driver. He was shining his phone flashlight and running up the stairs, looking back to see if a soldier was running after him. The poor coward was running away and shouting to himself that he did not understand how they could all be so lucky to have survived. The bus driver reached the door. He kept shouting that they could not get here without the bus. Then the man decided to open the door to hide. But a surprise awaited him. A military man was standing on the other side of the door. He asked the bastard if he thought the military would not find him. The bus driver's face was in severe pain. He was very scared, as if he had met death. Now that the man had no advantage and no manipulation in the form of the bus, he realized that the military would not have spared him. The soldier looked bad. His face was covered with burns and plasters. This gave him courage and scared the thin and unhappy bus driver even more. The man abruptly grabbed the traitor by the collar. It was obvious that the soldier had so much strength, fueled by anger, that it was very good that the man knew how to control his emotions. The bus driver screamed like a small child and begged the soldier not to do anything to him. But the man just wanted to know from the bus driver where the girls who were traveling with him were. He repeated this question several times and took the driver upstairs.